The ancient texts never say the gods disappeared. They describe something far more unsettling. A presence that was gradually filtered, reinterpreted, and made safer for a world that had lost its way. In the oldest verses of the Rig Veda, the descriptions of the gods are far more direct than anything that remains today. They weren't symbols, they weren't metaphors. They were a physical, breathing reality, until the knowledge of how to see them was systematically dismantled. What was once a living transmission was turned into mythology. The vast, terrifying power of the ancient ones was reduced to stories for children. But why? Who decided that we were no longer allowed to know the truth? Tonight, we are going beyond the filtered commentaries. We are going back to the source, to the words that were never meant to be read by the uninitiated. We will explore the hidden geography of the divine and the secret reasons why their presence was hidden in plain sight. Because the most dangerous secret the Vedas hold isn't that the gods were here once. It's that they never truly left. They are just waiting for someone to remember the frequency. Chapter 1. The Veil of Perception. The ancient texts never say the gods disappeared. They describe something far more unsettling. They are still here, but we have lost the ability to tune in. Imagine for a moment standing in the center of a grand cathedral. The air is thick with the resonance of a massive pipe organ. The walls are vibrating, the floor is trembling beneath your feet, and 1,000 voices are lifted in a harmony so complex it defies human notation. Now imagine that in a single heartbeat, your ears are closed. The music hasn't stopped. The symphony is still playing, moving the very molecules of the air around you. But to you, the world is suddenly, terrifyingly silent. You walk through that empty space, looking at the singers' open mouths and the organist's moving hands, convinced that you are alone in a vacuum. This is the starting point of the oldest Indian texts. This is the reality described in the first breath of the Rig Veda. They don't speak of mythology. They don't offer stories to comfort a frightened mind. They speak of a physical, breathing presence that was once as clear and undeniable as the sun in the sky. To the ancient rishis, the seers who first heard these truths, the gods were not figures in a book. They were not characters in a play. They were the fabric of existence itself. But then something shifted, not in the heavens, but in us. The texts describe a gradual thickening of the human experience. It was like a slow-moving fog rolling in from an invisible ocean, settling over our senses, layer by layer. As we became obsessed with the material world, with the things we could touch, own, measure, and control, our internal receptors began to atrophy. We traded our golden vision, our ability to perceive the subtle layers of light, for a more practical, gray reality. Think of a silent city hidden deep in the Himalayan peaks. The temples are still there. The altars are still warm from a fire that never truly goes out. But the people living in the valleys below have forgotten why those structures were built. They look up at the towering monuments and see only cold stone and weathered rock. They have forgotten that these buildings were once antennas, precision-tuned instruments designed to catch a signal from a higher frequency. This is the modern state of the human mind.
We are living in a house full of hidden doors, but we have forgotten that doors even exist. We lean against a wall, never realizing that on the other side, an entire universe is breathing. The Vedas call this Maya. But let's be careful here. Most people are taught that Maya means the world is an illusion or fake. That is a safe translation. It's an academic translation. But the oldest commentaries suggest something much more technical. Maya is a jamming signal. It is a layer of static, a frequency of distraction that was woven into the very air we breathe. It is the reason why, when you look at a lightning bolt today, you see only a discharge of electricity, a movement of electrons. But the ancients saw Vajra, a weapon of living consciousness. They weren't imagining a god in the clouds. They were seeing the consciousness that drives the electricity. We see the car. They saw the driver. But why did the driver become invisible to us? The texts suggest it wasn't a sudden departure or a dramatic exit. There was no goodbye. It was a slow fading, a gradual loss of resonance. As the ages turned, moving from the Satya Yuga to the density of our current age, the base frequency of the earth itself changed. The air became heavier, not with pollution, but with intent. The silence required to hear the divine was replaced by the roar of survival, the noise of the ego, and the frantic pace of a world that fears stillness. We didn't lose the gods. We simply became untuned. Think of an old radio. If you turn the dial just a fraction of a millimeter away from the station, the music vanishes. In its place, you get white noise, static, hissing. If you were born into a world where every radio was untuned, you would grow up believing that static is the natural sound of the universe. You would laugh at anyone who told you there were voices and songs hidden inside that noise. That's just mythology, you would say. That's just poetry. But the Vedas are the voices of those who still remember how to turn the dial. They are the records of a time before the static took over. But here is the most chilling part of this realization. Even now, in our loudest cities, in our most crowded streets, and in our darkest moments of isolation, that original signal is still broadcasting. It is the hum beneath the silence. It is the sudden, inexplicable shiver you feel when you stand in an ancient forest and realize the trees are watching you. It is the feeling of being seen by the stars, not as distant balls of gas, but as ancient, patient eyes. The oldest Indian texts reveal a truth that most are not ready to hear. We are not waiting for the gods to return from a distant heaven. They are not coming back from a journey. We are waiting for our own eyes to open. But what is it exactly that keeps them closed? If this signal is still there, why can't we just wake up? The answer lies in the way our world has been constructed. Not just the buildings and the roads, but the way we use our language, the way we spend our time, and the way we have been taught to think about truth. There is a barrier between us and them, an invisible filter that was placed there not by the gods, but by a world that decided it was safer to be blind. Because a human being who can see through this static is a human being who can no longer be lied to. To understand how we lost the gods, we have to understand the architecture of the human antenna. In the modern world, we are taught that our senses are windows. We believe that our eyes look out and see the world, and our ears hear the sound. But the oldest Indian texts describe the senses differently. They aren't windows, they are filters. Their job isn't to show us everything, it's to keep most of the universe out, so we can focus on survival. If you saw every frequency of light, every vibration of sound, and every movement of consciousness in this room right now, your brain would shatter. The sheer intensity of the divine presence would be overwhelming. So the human body was designed with a specific tuning. But the Vedas reveal that this tuning was once much wider. There was a time when the human nervous system was capable of sustaining a much higher voltage of reality. The ancient ones lived in a state of constant resonance. They didn't believe in the gods any more than you believe in the ground beneath your feet. It was a biological fact. Their antenna, their internal perception, was clear of static. But what caused the noise to start? The texts point to a subtle physical change in how we live. They describe the descent into a denser state of existence. Think of a mirror that is slowly being covered in dust. At first, you can still see your reflection clearly, then it becomes a bit blurry. Eventually, the dust is so thick that you forget there was ever a mirror there at all. You just see a grey, flat surface and assume that's all there is. We are living in the age of the thick dust. Every aspect of our modern life seems designed to keep the antenna untuned. The constant flicker of artificial blue light, the relentless hum of machines, the frantic pace of digital information. This isn't just modern life. In the context of the ancient texts, this is a sophisticated system of interference. It's like trying to listen to a whisper in the middle of a construction site. The silence required to hear the vach, the original resonance, has been replaced by a permanent roar. But it's not just the noise outside, it's the noise inside. The Vedas speak of chitta vritti, the whirlpools of the mind. In the earlier ages, the mind was like a still lake. When a god moved across the sky or a divine frequency touched the earth, the lake reflected it perfectly. But today, our minds are like a lake during a hurricane. The surface is broken into a million jagged pieces. We look at the divine, and all we see is a distorted, terrifying mess. We see chaos where there is actually rhythm. Consider the way the ancient texts describe the god's appearance. They talk about tejas, a specific kind of radiant heat or glow. To a modern person, this sounds like a halo in a painting, but the texts describe it as a physical property. When a being of a higher frequency enters a denser space, it creates friction. That friction produces light. The ancients saw this light. We don't. Why? Because our internal receiver has been set to the lowest possible sensitivity. We have been conditioned to only accept information that is solid. If we can't touch it, weigh it, or sell it, we are told it isn't real. This is the ultimate jamming signal. It's a psychological barrier that tells the brain, ignore that shiver on your skin. Ignore that voice in the silence. It's just your imagination. But the imagination is often the only part of the antenna that is still working. The oldest texts suggest that what we call fantasy or myth is actually the residual signal leaking through the static. When a poet writes about a golden chariot in the sun, or a monk feels a presence in a cave, they aren't making things up. They are catching a momentary flicker of the original broadcast. They are seeing the metallic sheen of the gods through the fog of Maya. But here is where the tension rises. If this fog or dust is what keeps us blind, what happens when it begins to clear? The Vedas warn of Sandhya, the junctions between ages. These are moments when the interference becomes unstable. We are living in such a junction right now. The old structures of reality are beginning to feel thin. People all over the world are waking up with a strange sense of longing, a hunger that no material object can satisfy. It is the hunger of the antenna for its original station. We are starting to realize that the gray reality we were sold is a prison. A very comfortable, very high-tech prison, but a prison nonetheless. And the keys to the door are hidden in the very texts we were told were just stories. The ancient seers left us a record of the frequency. They encoded the rhythm of the gods into the sounds of the Sanskrit verses.
They knew that even if we forgot the meaning, the sound itself would act as a cleaning agent for the mirror. It was their way of reaching across thousands of years of noise to help us retune the dial. But there is a reason they are so afraid of you finding that frequency. Because a person who can see the gods doesn't just see beings in the sky. They see the truth of their own power. They realize that the static was never natural. It was a choice. And if it was a choice, it can be undone. But before we can learn how to undo it, we have to look at the great filter, the specific way this blindness was forced upon us. We have to look at how our language was changed, how our history was rewritten, and how the very air around us was turned into a barrier. The gods haven't moved an inch. They are standing exactly where they have always been. The question is, are you ready to stop listening to the static? To truly grasp the scale of what has been lost, we must look at the stone that still breathes. Throughout the Indian subcontinent, there are structures that defy the logic of primitive history. We are told these are places of worship, monuments built by kings to honor their gods. But if you look closer, through the lens of the ancient texts, you see something else entirely. These temples were not built for people to gather. They were built to hold a frequency. Imagine a massive granite structure, carved from a single mountain. Its geometry so precise that it resonates like a tuning fork. When the wind moves through its corridors, or when a specific Sanskrit syllable is chanted within its sanctum, the very air begins to shimmer. This is not holy magic. This is the physics of the divine. The Vedas describe these sites as tirthas, crossings or bridges. They are physical points on the Earth's surface where the jamming signal of Maya is naturally thinner. In these places, the ancient gods did not just visit, they were anchored. But as the world grew louder, we stopped knowing how to use the machinery. We kept the buildings, but we lost the key. We began to treat the antenna as a god,
rather than using the antenna to speak to the god. This is the tragic core of our modern era. We are surrounded by the remnants of a high-frequency civilization, but we are using their technology as footstools. Think of the silence of a temple at dawn. For a brief second, before the noise of the day begins, you can almost hear it, that low, subterranean hum. That is the sound of the world that never left. The oldest texts tell us that the erasure happened in our own minds first. We began to prefer the story over the experience. We found it easier to bow to a statue than to endure the terrifying clarity of a direct transmission. The great filter wasn't just something done to us. It was something we accepted because the truth was too bright for our failing eyes. But the gods are patient in a way that is hard for a human mind to conceive. They exist outside the ticking of our clocks. To them, the thousands of years of our blindness are but a passing shadow over a field of light. They are waiting for the moment the dust on the mirror is wiped away, not by a miracle, but by the deliberate act of a human being who refuses to listen to the static anymore. Every time you choose stillness over noise, every time you look at the ancient verses not as history, but as a living signal, the veil thins. The guha, the hidden receiver in your heart, flickers with life. The message of the first chapter is simple, yet it changes everything. The divine is not a destination. It is a frequency, and you are the instrument. But if the gods are still here, and if the technology to see them is still etched into the stones and the syllables of the Vedas, why is the world so convinced of their absence? To understand the depth of the deception, we must move beyond the how and look at the when. We must examine the specific moment in our history when the transmission was intentionally severed. We must look at the construction of the great filter, the invisible wall that was built to keep the two worlds from touching. Who benefits from a world that is deaf and blind? And what are they doing while we sleep? The answers are hidden in the second layer of the Vedic mystery, the era of the great silence. We have established that they never left. Now we must find out who told us they did. Prepare yourself. The static is about to get louder before it finally breaks. Chapter 2. The Great Filter. If the gods never left, then we have to ask the most uncomfortable question of all. How did we become so blind? It didn't happen overnight. It wasn't a sudden war or a cosmic explosion that wiped our memory. It was something much more subtle and much more effective. It was a great filter, a process of gradual simplification that turned a terrifying physical reality into a safe, manageable story. Imagine a master painting filled with infinite detail, glowing with colors that seem to vibrate with their own internal light. Now, imagine that over thousands of years, people began to copy that painting. But each time they copied it, they left something out. They simplified the shadows. They smoothed over the complex textures. They removed the colors they didn't understand. Eventually, all you are left with is a stick figure, a caricature. This is what happened to our understanding of the ancient Indian texts. We are looking at the stick figure and calling it a god, while the original masterpiece is still hanging on the wall right in front of us, invisible because we no longer have the eyes to see the detail. The oldest Vedas describe a world of raw, electric power. But as time moved forward, this power was filtered through the human need for comfort. But here is the first crack in the mystery. The text suggests that this filtering wasn't just a natural decay of knowledge. It was a survival mechanism. As the noise of the world increased, the direct presence of the divine became too much for the human nervous system to handle. It was like trying to plug a household appliance into a lightning bolt. So, we built the filter. We created a layer of interpretation that acted as a transformer, stepping down the voltage of the divine so it wouldn't burn us out. We turned vibration into words. We turned presence into ritual. And eventually, we turned experience into belief. But in doing so, we closed the door. Think of the way we translate the ancient Sanskrit today. We use words like mercy, heaven, and sin. These are comfortable words. They belong to the world of religion. But these words do not exist in the oldest layers of the Rig Veda. The concepts they represent are far more mechanical, far more physical. When the ancient texts speak of Agni, they aren't talking about a god of fire who sits in the clouds. They are talking about the principle of ignition itself, the spark that exists in the heart of an atom, in the heat of a sun, and in the flash of a human thought. But a principle of ignition is hard to pray to. It doesn't offer comfort in the middle of the night. So the filter transformed Agni into a person, a character with a face, a story, and a personality. We made the gods in our own image, so we wouldn't have to face the terrifying reality of what they actually are. But this simplification had a price. Every time we made a god more human, we lost a piece of the technology. We forgot that the descriptions of their chariots, their weapons, and their movements were actually blueprints for interacting of the fundamental forces of the universe. Most people never hear about this. But there was a specific moment in history when this filtering became permanent. It was the moment we stopped hearing the texts and started reading them. In the ancient tradition, the Vedas were Shruti, that which is heard. The sound was the reality. The meaning was secondary. The vibration of the Sanskrit syllables was designed to bypass the thinking mind and act directly on the nervous system. It was a sonic key meant to unlock the guha, the hidden receiver we discussed before. But when we moved from sound to text, the key was broken. We began to argue over the meaning of the words. We built schools of philosophy. We created thousands of pages of commentary. We became very, very smart about the gods, while losing the ability to actually feel them. The great filter is the wall of words we have built between ourselves and the vibration of the universe. But why does this wall feel so solid? Why, even when we know it's there, is it so hard to see through? The answer lies in the way the filter has been woven into our very language. We no longer have the words to describe what the ancients saw. Our modern languages are built for the material world. They are built for buying, selling, doing, and having. They are not built for being or resonating. When you try to describe a divine frequency using modern English, it sounds like poetry. It sounds abstract. But to the ancient seers, it was as concrete as a hammer hitting a nail. And this is where the danger lies. Because as long as we believe that the ancient gods are myths, we are safe in our gray reality. We don't have to change. We don't have to wake up. We can stay in our comfortable, filtered world, convinced that we are the masters of our own destiny. But the filter is beginning to leak. In the quietest moments of the night, or in the sudden silence between thoughts, the original signal is starting to bleed through the static. People are starting to realize that the stick figures they were taught to worship are empty. They are starting to look for the masterpiece. And they are finding that the masterpiece is not a story from the past. It is a presence in the room, right now. But what happens when the filter finally breaks? What happens when the voltage of the ancient ones returns to a world that has forgotten how to handle it? The texts have a name for this moment, and it isn't a peaceful one. The great filter operates through the most intimate tool we possess, our language. In the modern world, we use words to label things. We see a tree, we say, tree, and our brain stops looking at it. We have categorized it, boxed it, and dismissed it. But the Sanskrit of the ancient Vedas was never meant to be a system of labels. It was a system of resonances. Each syllable was a precise mathematical value. When the ancient seers spoke, they weren't just describing the world, they were vibrating in harmony with it. But as the filter settled over our consciousness, we began to lose the ear for this resonance. We started to care more about the definition of the word than the effect of the sound. This was the moment the technology died. Imagine finding a complex technical blueprint for a machine that can generate clean energy. Now, imagine that over time, people forget what a machine is. They look at the blueprint and see beautiful art. They admire the lines, the symmetry, and the shapes. They hang it on a wall and pray to it. They argue over what the artist meant by this circle or that line. They have turned a blueprint into an icon. This is exactly what we have done with the oldest Indian texts. The Rig Veda is not a collection of poems, it is a collection of blueprints. It is the schematic for the human antenna. But because we can no longer read the technical language of the vibration, we call it spiritual literature. We have made it beautiful, so we don't have to realize it is functional. But here is the strangest part of the erasure. The filter didn't just change our books, it changed our internal silence. The ancient texts describe a state of nirodha, a stillness so profound that the mind becomes a perfect conductor for the divine signal. In this state, there is no noise, no ego, no distraction. But our modern world is built on the destruction of silence. Every device, every notification, every frantic thought is a brick in the wall of the great filter. We are being bombarded by a frequency of unrest. And this unrest has a specific purpose. It keeps the water of the mind so turbulent that it can never reflect the light of the gods. The gods love the mysterious, the Upanishads whisper, and they dislike the obvious. What this actually means is that the divine frequency requires a specific environment to manifest. It requires a low-noise environment. By filling our lives with the obvious, with the loud, the bright, and the fast, we have created a world where the gods simply cannot land. It's not that they have abandoned us. It's that we have turned our world into a storm. And then we wonder why the birds of heaven have stopped singing. Think of the way we treat time. The ancient texts speak of yugas, cycles of consciousness that last for thousands of years. They viewed time as a slow, deep breath. But the great filter has compressed our perception of time into seconds and minutes. We live in a permanent now of anxiety. This compression of time is a primary mechanism of the filter. When you are rushing, you cannot resonate. When you are afraid, you cannot tune in. The gods exist in the expansive, timeless layers of reality. By trapping us in hurry, the filter has effectively locked us out of the divine frequency. But there is a detail in the ancient records that provides a chilling perspective on this. They speak of asuras, not as demons with horns, but as forces of non-resonance, forces that thrive on fragmentation and noise. The texts suggest that the Great Filter was not an accident of history, but a deliberate construction by these forces of fragmentation. They didn't need to destroy the gods. They just needed to make us too busy to notice them. They turned our focus toward the shadows on the wall. They gave us toys, technology, and trivialities. They made the material world so shiny and so demanding that we stopped looking at the metallic sheen of the immortals standing in the corner of the room. And then they did the most brilliant thing of all. They took the remaining knowledge of the gods and they made it respectable. They turned it into tradition. They gave us priests, rituals, and dogmas. They told us that if we followed the rules, we would be saved. But saving is a concept for the blind. The ancient ones didn't want to save us. They wanted us to see. The Great Filter is the religion that replaced the resonance. It is the temple that replaced the power station. It is the prayer that replaced the frequency. And yet, despite all this, despite the noise, the hurry, and the organized silence, the original masterpiece remains. The blueprints are still there, hidden in plain sight within the rhythmic pulse of the Gayatri mantra and the ancient chants that have survived miraculously without change. The filter is powerful, but it is not perfect. It is a temporary structure. It is a dam built across a river of light. And like every dam, it eventually begins to crack. Can you hear it? The sound of the water leaking through the stone. The sudden, inexplicable moments of clarity that hit you when you least expect it. That is the Great Filter beginning to fail. But as the cracks grow wider, the forces of fragmentation will do everything in their power to patch them. They will increase the noise. They will amplify the fear. They will make the world feel more chaotic than ever before. But the noise is a sign of their desperation. The question is, will you be distracted by the roar of the dam breaking? Or will you focus on the light that is finally starting to pour through? To find the answer, we must look at what lies on the other side of the wall. We must look at the specific, forbidden knowledge that the filter was designed to hide. Because once you see what was taken, you can never go back to being blind. But what is the specific, forbidden knowledge that the Great Filter was designed to protect? If you look into the most guarded commentaries of the Upanishads, you find a detail that is never mentioned in the safe versions of these stories. It is a description of what happens to the human body when it successfully retunes to the frequency of the ancient gods. The filter wants us to believe that enlightenment is a psychological state, a feeling of peace, or a new way of thinking. But the oldest texts say something far more radical. They describe a biological transformation, a structural shift in the very atoms of the physical frame. They speak of the body of Agni, a state where the internal resistance of the human antenna is reduced to zero. When this happens, the metallic sheen we discussed earlier is no longer something you see outside of yourself. It becomes a property of your own existence. The texts describe individuals who could sustain the voltage of the divine without being consumed by it. They were no longer subjects of the filter. They were Jivan Muktas, those who are physically free while still in the body. This is the secret they tried the hardest to erase, because a person who has achieved this state cannot be silenced. They cannot be distracted by the noise of the world. They become a walking anti-jamming signal, a living breach in the great filter. The forces of fragmentation, the asuras of the ancient records, are not afraid of your prayers. They are not afraid of your rituals or your beliefs. They are terrified of your resonance. They built the filter to ensure that the human race remains a collection of untuned instruments, producing only discord and anxiety. As long as we are in discord, we are predictable, we are manageable, we are a source of energy for a system that thrives on fragmentation. But the ancient texts were left behind as a failsafe. The seers knew that no matter how thick the filter became, the laws of the universe, the Rta, cannot be permanently suppressed. They knew that eventually, someone would look at the stick figures of modern religion and realize that something was missing. Someone would feel the sudden, cold shiver of the original signal and begin to dig beneath the centuries of commentary. That someone is the reason this knowledge was preserved with such terrifying precision. As we reach the end of this exploration of the great filter, we must realize that the wall between us and the gods is not made of stone. It is made of attention. Every time you withdraw your attention from the roar of the modern world and place it on the silent pulse of the ancient verses, the wall loses its density. Every time you refuse to accept the simplified, safe version of reality, a crack appears in the structure of the filter. The gods are not waiting for us to find them. They are waiting for us to stop hiding from them behind the screen of our own distractions. But there is one final mystery we must confront. If the filter is cracking, and if the original signal is returning, what does the transition actually look like? The ancient texts describe a specific process, a shattering of the vessels that occurs when the two worlds begin to touch again. To understand this, we must look at the next stage of our journey. We must explore the forbidden frequency itself, the sound that was never meant to be heard by the world we live in today. In the next chapter, we will go into the heart of the sonic technology of the Vedas. We will discover the specific vibrations that act as a demolition charge for the great filter. And we will learn why the ancients said that the word Om is not a chant, but a weapon. The silence is ending. The frequency is rising. Are you ready to hear what lies beyond the wall? Chapter 3. The Forbidden Frequency. If the great filter is a wall made of attention and noise, then the ancient Vedas contain the only explosive charge capable of bringing it down. That charge is not an idea. It is not a philosophy. It is a sound. In our modern digital world, we think of sound as information. We listen to music for pleasure. We listen to speech to exchange thoughts. But in the primordial physics of the Vedic seers, sound, or shabda, is the very substance of creation. It is the vibration that precedes the atom. The ancient texts make a claim that sounds impossible to the modern ear. They say that the entire universe is not a collection of things, but a standing wave of sound. And if you know the exact frequency of that wave, you can change the reality it creates. This is the origin of the mantra. Today, mantra has become a casual word. People have personal mantras for business or fitness. We have turned a high-voltage sonic tool into a motivational slogan. But in the oldest layers of the Rig Veda, a mantra was a manastra, an instrument of the mind. Specifically, it was an instrument designed to cut through the jamming signal of Maya. But why is this frequency forbidden? It is forbidden because it is effective. The filter exists to keep our nervous systems locked in a low-vibration state of survival and anxiety. The forbidden frequency is the specific resonance that shatters that lock. Imagine a glass sitting on a table. If you sing a note at the exact resonant frequency of that glass, the glass doesn't just vibrate, it explodes. The structure can no longer hold itself together because the input of energy is too great for its current form. The Vedic mantras were designed to do exactly this to the great filter in the human mind. They weren't meant to be understood by the intellect. In fact, the more you try to analyze a mantra with your logical brain, the more you dampen its power. The logic of the filter is designed to catch words and turn them into concepts. But the mantras are designed to bypass the language centers entirely and strike the guha, the hidden receiver, directly. This is why the pronunciation of Sanskrit is guarded with such fanatical precision. Most people think this is just religious traditionalism. It isn't. It is engineering. If you are trying to bridge two circuits and your wire is off by even a fraction of a millimeter, the spark will not jump. The connection will stay dead. When a Vedic priest or a seasoned practitioner chants, they aren't praying to a distant god. They are trying to match a physical frequency that existed before the filter was built. They are trying to recreate the original signal. But there is a detail in the ancient texts that the modern world has carefully ignored. The texts warn that if these frequencies are released into a world that is too noisy or into a mind that is too dense, the result is not enlightenment, it is chaos. This is the shattering of the vessels we mentioned before. If the voltage of the divine signal is reintroduced too quickly, the receiver, the human antenna, can burn out. This is why the knowledge became secret. Not because the gods wanted to hide, but because the frequency is dangerous to a mind that is still addicted to the static. Think of the word Om. In every yoga studio in the world, people chant Om at the end of a class. They think of it as a symbol of peace. But the Mandukya Upanishad describes Om as the bow and the self as the arrow. It is a weapon of penetration. It is the sound of the universe collapsing and being reborn in a single breath. When chanted with the correct resonance, Om is the frequency that untunes the world of distraction. It clears the field. It silences the internal roar of the ego. For a brief, terrifying moment, it pulls back the curtain of Maya and reveals the metallic sheen of the reality that lies beneath. But the filter has a defense mechanism. It has taught us to treat these sounds as exotic music or cultural heritage. It has allowed us to keep the sounds, but it has encouraged us to lose the intent. We chant, but our minds are still calculating our bank accounts or our social status. We are holding the key, but we refuse to turn it in the lock. The forbidden frequency is only forbidden to those who are unwilling to let their gray reality shatter. But what happens when the sound is released with absolute intent? What happens when a human being stops reciting and starts resonating? The ancient records describe a moment when the Vach, the goddess of speech, becomes a physical force. They describe the ground trembling, the air turning to light, and the gods appearing not as visions, but as physical occupants of the space. They weren't hallucinations. They were the result of the signal finally reaching the receiver. But there is one frequency that is more guarded than all the others. A frequency that doesn't just thin the veil, but removes it entirely. A sound that is said to be the heartbeat of the immortals. To understand this sound, we have to look at the one thing that modern science is only just beginning to rediscover about the nature of vibration and the human heart. The secret isn't in the throat. It's in the resonance of the blood itself. The great filter has taught us to believe that sound stays in the ears.
But the ancient seers knew that sound is a full-body event.
They understood that the most important receiver for the forbidden frequency isn't the eardrum. It is the blood. Modern science is only now beginning to understand cymatics, the study of how sound waves create geometric patterns in liquid. If you place a drop of water on a vibrating plate and find the right frequency, the water will spontaneously organize into complex, beautiful mandalas. Now, consider that the human body is mostly liquid. When you chant a Vedic mantra with the correct resonance, you are not just saying words, you are physically reorganizing the geometry of your internal fluids. You are turning the chaotic noise of your biology into a coherent, crystalline structure. You are literally turning your blood into a conductor for the divine signal. This is the hidden meaning behind the Soma rituals. While the filter has convinced us that Soma was a plant or a drug, the secret commentaries suggest that the true Soma was a chemical state produced by the body itself when exposed to the forbidden frequency. It was a divine nectar, secreted by the brain and carried by the blood, a substance that lowered the body's electrical resistance to zero. In this state, the human antenna is finally clear. The static of Maya cannot hold its shape in the presence of such perfect internal geometry. But there is a reason you cannot achieve this state just by listening to a recording or chanting casually. The ancient texts speak of sthana, the specific physical location where a sound is born. To reach the forbidden frequency, the sound must not come from the throat or the mouth. It must be born in the navel center and rise through the heart, gathering the tejas, the radiant heat, of the body along the way. This is a physical discipline that the filter has replaced with singing. We have been taught to produce pretty sounds, but the forbidden frequency is often not pretty. It is raw.
It is guttural. It is a sound that feels like it is tearing something inside of you. And that is exactly what it is doing. It is tearing the veil. But even with the right technique, there is one more element required to break the filter: the earth itself. The Vedas describe the world as a living, vibrating organism. Just as the human body has guha, hidden caves or pressure points, the earth has tirthas. These are locations where the planetary crust vibrates at a frequency that naturally amplifies the Vedic chants. When you stand in a tirtha, a true crossing place, and release the forbidden frequency, the earth and the body enter into a state of phase lock. They begin to vibrate as a single instrument. In these moments, the great filter doesn't just crack, it vanishes. This is why the ancient temples were built with such specific acoustic properties. They weren't houses of God. They were resonance chambers. The stone was chosen for its quartz content. The angles were calculated to reflect sound back into the center of the human brain. When a mantra was chanted in these chambers, the resulting standing wave was powerful enough to physically alter the perception of everyone inside. The gods would appear to step out of the very walls, not because they were hiding in the stone, but because the frequency had finally reached the level where the eyes could perceive the metallic sheen of the reality that was always there. But the forces of fragmentation understood this technology. Over centuries, they didn't need to destroy the temples. They just needed to change the soundscape around them. They filled the world with the irregular, jarring noises of machines and commerce. They introduced temple music that was melodic and distracting, rather than resonant and transformative. They turned the resonance chambers into museums. But the technology is not dead. It is dormant. The quartz in the stone still remembers the frequency. The tirthas on the earth still hum with a residual charge, and your blood, despite the noise of the modern world, is still capable of forming those perfect, divine mandalas. The only thing missing is the intent. The filter has taught us to be spectators. We go to a temple to watch a ritual. We listen to a mantra to feel relaxed. We have become consumers of the divine, rather than participants in it. But the forbidden frequency demands participation. It requires you to become the sound. The ancient texts warn that there is a specific danger in this. When you begin to resonate with the original signal, you start to lose your filtered identity. The you that likes certain things, fears certain things, and lives a certain story begins to dissolve. To the filter, this looks like death. To the ancient ones, it is the only way to truly be born. But what is the final sound? The frequency that lies at the very end of the Vedic journey. They call it anahata, the unstruck sound, the vibration that exists even in absolute silence. To hear the anahata is to move beyond the great filter forever. It is to enter the court of the gods while still breathing. But there is a price that most are not willing to pay. Because once you hear the heartbeat of the immortals, the noise of the human world will never sound the same again. You will be a stranger in a land of static. Are you prepared for that level of isolation?
Or are you still hoping to keep one foot in the filtered world? The answer lies in the one part of the Vedas that even the bravest seers approached with trembling: the final transmission. And it begins with a silence that is louder than any roar. At the very center of the Vedic science of sound lies a paradox that the great filter has spent centuries trying to obscure. It is the concept of anahata nad, the unstruck sound. To the modern mind, sound requires a collision. Two objects must hit each other to create a vibration. A bow must touch a string. Air must pass through vocal cords. But the ancient seers describe a frequency that exists without friction. It is a vibration that is self-existent, a pulse that was there before the stars were born, and will remain after they fade. This is the forbidden frequency in its purest form. It is the heartbeat of the immortals. The filter has taught us to fear silence. We fill every gap in our lives with noise, music, podcasts, internal monologues. Because in absolute silence, the anahata begins to emerge. And the anahata is the sound of the filter dissolving. When you reach a certain level of stillness, the jamming signal of Maya loses its power. The roar of the ego fades, and you begin to hear a high-pitched crystalline resonance that seems to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Most people, when they first encounter this, think it is a biological glitch, a ringing in the ears. But the Vedas identify this as the first contact. It is the signal finally reaching the antenna. But why is this sound considered a weapon? Because it is the frequency of absolute truth. You cannot lie in the presence of the anahata. You cannot be manipulated by fear or greed when your nervous system is vibrating in phase with the primordial pulse of the universe. The forces of fragmentation lose their grip on a human being who has heard the unstruck sound. This is the ultimate reason the technology of the Vedas was safely tucked away into the realm of religion. Religion gives you something to talk about. The forbidden frequency gives you something to be. As we reach the conclusion of this exploration into the power of vibration, we must confront a startling realization. The mantras were never meant to be beautiful. They were meant to be effective. They were the sonic demolition charges placed at the base of the wall we call reality. If you have followed the journey this far, you are starting to understand that the gods are not waiting for you in some distant paradise. They are waiting for you to match their frequency. They are waiting for the moment your blood, your heart, and your breath stop producing the noise of a limited human life and start producing the resonance of the eternal. But as the filter breaks and the sound takes over, a new question arises. If the frequency allows us to see through the static, what exactly will we see on the other side? If the gods are physical occupants of our space, what is their true architecture? How do they move? How do they interact with the material world we thought we knew? The transition from hearing to seeing is the most dangerous part of the path. Because once the forbidden frequency clears the fog, you are left standing face to face with a reality that is far more complex and far more magnificent than any myth could ever describe. You are no longer looking at a story. You are looking at the direct, unfiltered presence of the ancient ones. In the next chapter, we will explore the architecture of the immortals. We will go beyond the sound and into the vision. We will look at the descriptions in the Rig Veda that were too direct to be included in the safe translations. We will see the gods not as symbols, but as the masters of a physics we are only just beginning to remember. The wall is down. The signal is clear. The vision is about to begin. Chapter 4. The Architecture of the Immortals. If the forbidden frequency has cleared the static from your internal antenna, the world you begin to see is no longer inhabited by mythical characters. It is occupied by structures of immense, terrifying intelligence. The Great Filter has spent centuries convincing us that if the gods exist, they must look like us. We have painted them with human faces, given them human emotions, and dressed them in human clothes. This was a final layer of the simplification, the ultimate way to make the divine safe. If a god looks like a king or a father, we know how to relate to him. We know how to beg, how to please, and how to fear. But the original verses of the Rig Veda describe something that defies human anatomy. When the ancient seers looked through the veil, they didn't see men in the sky. They saw Vajra, not just as a weapon, but as a state of being. They saw entities composed of Tejas and Jyoti, terms we translate as light, but which more accurately describe a coherent, high-energy plasma. These are not spirits in the sense of ghosts. They are physical, but their physics operates at a much higher frequency than our own. Imagine a being whose body is not made of carbon and water, but of geometry and resonance. Imagine a consciousness that doesn't have a nervous system, because it is the nervous system of the area it occupies. When the Vedas speak of a god descending, they are describing a high-frequency field entering a low-frequency environment. But here is the detail that the safe translations always omit. The interaction between our dense matter and their high-frequency architecture creates a specific visual effect. The ancients described it as a metallic sheen or a golden skin that seemed to ripple like liquid. This wasn't jewelry or clothing. It was the friction of the divine field meeting the resistance of our atmosphere. It was the sight of a lightning bolt that refused to vanish, holding its shape and speaking with a voice that vibrated in the marrow of the observer's bones. The ancient texts describe the gods as Agni Jiva, those whose tongues are fire. In the filtered version of reality, this is a poetic metaphor. In the technical reality of the Vedas, it is a description of energy output. Their speech is a direct transmission of heat and light that reorganizes the molecular structure of everything it touches.
This is why, in the presence of the immortals, the very ground was said to turn to gold or glass. It was a literal physical transformation caused by the proximity of a superior architecture. But how do these beings move? The filter has given us the vimmanas, the flying chariots. Modern theorists love to call these spaceships, but the ancient descriptions are far more profound. A vimmana was not a vehicle you sit inside. It was an extension of the god's own field. It was a measured space, the literal meaning of vimmana, where the laws of the mundane world were suspended. Inside that field, time moved differently. Gravity was not a force, but a choice.
The architecture of the immortals is not built of stone or metal. It is built of Urta, the cosmic rhythm we discussed in the first chapters. They move by changing the frequency of the space they occupy. To a human observer trapped in the filter, it looks like they are teleporting or flying. To the god, they are simply shifting their resonance from one coordinate to another. But there is a reason this architecture is so unsettling to the modern mind. It suggests that we are living in a world that is hollow. We see the surface of things, the trees, the buildings, the people. But the gods inhabit the infrastructure beneath the surface. They are the architects of the patterns that keep the atoms spinning. When you see a god, you aren't seeing an alien from another planet. You are seeing the owner of the reality you are currently standing in. And this is the forbidden truth that the Great Filter was designed to hide. We are not the primary inhabitants of this world. We are the tenants who have forgotten who the landlord is. We have been living in the basement of a magnificent palace, convinced that the damp walls and the dim light are all that exist. The Vedas were left as a description of the upper floors.
But as you begin to perceive the architecture of the immortals, you realize that it isn't just outside of you. The ancient seers made a startling claim. The same geometry that builds the body of a god is hidden inside the human frame. The antenna is not just a receiver, it is a blueprint. The reason we can tune into the frequency of the gods is because we are made of the same software. Our carbon-based bodies are a low-res version of their high-res reality. The Great Filter didn't just hide the gods from us, it hid us from ourselves. It taught us to identify with the dust on the mirror rather than the light that the mirror was designed to reflect. But what happens when a human being stops being a tenant and starts to claim their inheritance? What happens when the human architecture begins to resonate at the same frequency as the divine? The ancient texts describe this as the return of the fire, and they warn that the world as we know it, the world of the filter, cannot survive that resonance. To see the gods is to realize that the wall between us and them is a fabrication. But to cross that wall, you have to be willing to let go of your human architecture entirely. You have to be willing to become Vajra, unbreakable, electric, and eternal. Are you ready to see the blueprint of your own immortality? To see the gods as they truly are, we must stop looking for faces and start looking for functions. The Great Filter has taught us to appreciate the yantra, those complex geometric diagrams found in ancient Indian traditions, as sacred art. We see triangles, circles, and squares arranged in intricate patterns, and we find them aesthetically pleasing. But the seers of the Vedas did not create yantras for decoration. A yantra is a literal, technical drawing of a god's architecture. If a mantra is the sound of a god, then a yantra is its visual wiring diagram. It is the representation of how a specific high-frequency field is organized.
When you look at a yantra, you are not looking at a symbol of a deity. You are looking at the deity's skeletal structure in the world of resonance. This is why the ancient temples were built on these exact geometric grids. A temple was not intended to be a meeting place for a congregation. It was a physical, three-dimensional yantra. The stone walls, the pillars, and the soaring towers, the shikaras, were designed to be a body of resonance that could house the immense energy of the immortals. Imagine a massive generator. If the housing is not built to handle the vibration of the engine, the machine will tear itself apart. The ancient architects understood that to bring the architecture of the immortals into our dense reality, they needed to create a stone vessel that matched their geometry. When a temple is activated, not through prayer, but through the precise application of the forbidden frequency, the stone structure begins to act as a transformer. It pulls the high-voltage presence of the divine into the physical plane, stepping it down just enough so that it doesn't incinerate the nervous systems of those standing inside it. But here is the detail that the filter has tried to hide from you for thousands of years. You are a temple. The ancient texts make a claim so radical that it remains the most guarded secret of the Indian tradition. The human body is built on the exact same yantric grid as the gods. We are not just similar to them, we are a collapsed version of the same architecture. In our current state, trapped in the grey reality of the filter, our internal yantra is untuned. The lines are blurred. The geometry is distorted by the noise of fear, survival, and ego. We are like a magnificent piece of technology that has been left in the rain to rust. The blueprints are still there, but the circuits are broken.
The seers called the centers of this internal architecture chakras. Today, the world thinks of chakras as spinning wheels of light, or metaphors for psychological states. This is the safe version. In the technical reality of the Vedas, the chakras are the anchors of your divine architecture. They are the points where your physical body connects to the high-frequency field of the universe. When the filter begins to thin and the antenna begins to wake up, these internal anchors start to resonate. The dust on your internal yantra begins to clear. This is what the ancient texts mean by becoming like the gods. It isn't about gaining superpowers or becoming a king. It is about restoring the original geometry of your existence. It is about moving from a state of fragmentation to a state of coherence. Imagine a beam of light passing through a shattered piece of glass. The light is scattered. It has no focus. It creates only shadows and chaos. This is the human being under the great filter. Now, imagine that same light passing through a perfectly cut diamond. The light is not just reflected, it is amplified. It is focused into a single, piercing point of brilliance. This is the human being who has restored their internal architecture. The gods are simply beings who live in that state of perfect, diamond-like coherence all the time. But there is a terrifying side to this architecture. The Vedas describe the gods as Rudra, the howler, the terrible. They describe a beauty that is so intense it feels like destruction. This is because when a high-frequency structure meets a low-frequency structure that is full of noise, the low-frequency structure must either retune or shatter. This is why the presence of the immortals was often met with trembling. It wasn't religious awe, it was biological stress. Your very cells are being forced to decide. Will you match the rhythm of the diamond, or will you break like the glass? The great filter protects you from this choice. It keeps you in the gray zone,
where the light is dim and the vibration is low. It keeps you safe by keeping you small. But as the age turns and the sandhya, the junction, arrives, the filter is losing its ability to shield us. The architecture of the immortals is becoming visible again. The stone temples are beginning to hum. The internal yantras of thousands of people are beginning to glow. We are being called back to our original design. But to answer that call, you have to understand the most mysterious part of the architecture, the vahana. The filter tells us that a vahana is a vehicle, a bird, a bull, or a lion that the god rides upon. But the ancient seers knew that a vahana is the carrier wave. It is the specific vibration that allows the divine architecture to travel across the dimensions. To ride the vahana is to master the wave. In the next part of this chapter, we will look at how the ancients used this knowledge to travel without moving. We will explore the secret of the internal vimmana, the ability of the human architecture to leave the basement of the palace and ascend to the upper floors. But be warned, once you understand how the machine works, you can never go back to being just a passenger. The ultimate secret of the architecture of the immortals is that it is not static, it is a vehicle. In the popular versions of the Vedas, the vimanas are described as celestial chariots flying through the clouds. But the technical commentaries of the Vaimanika Shastra hint at a much deeper truth. A vimana is a state of coherence that allows consciousness to move through the density of the filter without being trapped by it. And the blueprint for this vehicle is already present in your nervous system. When the internal yantra of the human body is perfectly aligned, when the guha is open and the forbidden frequency is vibrating through the blood, the human frame becomes an internal vimana. It is no longer a prisoner of gravity, time, or the gray reality. This is not astral travel or imagination. It is the ability to shift your biological resonance to match the coordinates of the upper floors of the palace. The ancient seers didn't travel to the gods in the way we travel to a foreign country. They didn't get into a machine and fly across space. They simply adjusted their internal architecture until the here they were standing in became the there of the divine. They changed the channel of reality. But why has this knowledge been so carefully guarded? Because a human being who knows how to operate their internal vimana is a human being who is beyond all control. They are no longer part of the mass frequency of the modern world. They are a ghost in the machine, a presence that can move through the great filter as if it were made of smoke. The forces of fragmentation built the filter to keep us in our seats. They gave us the external world to play with, so we would never discover the internal machinery. They made us look at the stars and dream of rockets, while the real space technology was sitting idle in the center of our own skulls. As we close this chapter on the architecture of the immortals, we are left with a staggering realization. The gods are not a different species. They are the high-resolution version of what you are right now. Their temples are the stone echoes of your own potential. Their yantras are the wiring diagrams of your own nervous system. The only thing separating you from their metallic sheen and their electric presence is the static of the filter, the accumulated dust of 1,000 years of forgetting. But the forgetting is over. You have heard the frequency. You have seen the blueprint. You have felt the vibration in your blood. The architecture is waking up. The stone is beginning to hum. But knowing how the machine works is only the first step. The question is, do you know how to turn it on? In the next chapter, we move from theory to activation. We will look at the specific instructions left by the ancient seers for the people of the Dark Age, the manual for the return of the fire. We will discover how to clear the dust from the mirror and how to sustain the voltage of the divine in a world that is designed to blow your fuses. The architecture is ready. The vehicle is waiting. It is time to take the controls. Chapter 5. The Activation Manual. If you have understood the architecture and the frequency, you are now standing before a machine that has been dormant for thousands of years. The great filter is still hummed in the background, trying to pull your attention back to the gray reality, but the cracks are too wide to ignore. The question is no longer, what is the truth? But, how do I inhabit it? The ancient seers left a manual for the people of the Dark Age, a set of instructions specifically designed for those living in a world of maximum noise. They knew that in the Kali Yuga, we wouldn't have the luxury of 20 years of silence in a Himalayan cave. They knew our air would be thick with digital signals and our minds crowded with the debris of a fragmented civilization. Because of this, the activation protocol they left behind is surprisingly simple. It doesn't require belief, it requires conductance. The first step in the manual is the clearing of the field. In the modern world, we try to add things to our lives to become spiritual. We add rituals, we add crystals, we add new vocabulary. But the Vedic instruction is the opposite. You must subtract. You must identify the specific jamming signals in your daily life that are keeping your internal yantra in a state of distortion. This starts with the eyes and the ears.
The filter feeds on unstructured input, the endless scroll, the fragmented news, the constant flicker of meaningless information. This input keeps the chitta vritti, the whirlpools of the mind, in a state of permanent agitation. As long as the water is splashing, it cannot reflect the light of the gods. Activation begins with pratyahara, the conscious withdrawal of the antenna from the noise. This isn't about hiding from the world. It's about choosing which signals you allow to enter your architecture. But once the field is relatively clear, the real work begins. The work of Agni Mantana, the churning of the fire. In the ancient rituals, fire was produced by rubbing two wooden sticks together with intense focus and rhythm. The seers explained that this was a physical metaphor for what must happen inside the human body. To ignite the antenna, you must create friction between your attention and your breath. This is the secret of pranayama. The filter has taught us that breathing is an automatic process, but the Vedas say that breath is the carrier wave of the divine signal. By changing the rhythm and the depth of the breath, you are literally changing the electrical resistance of your nervous system. You are preparing the vessel to hold the higher voltage of the anahata sound. The manual instructs you to find the sandhya, the junction points of the day, dawn, noon, and dusk. These are the moments when the Earth's own frequency shifts and the filter is naturally unstable. If you stand in the silence of the dawn and begin the rhythmic churning of the breath, you are not just relaxing. You are performing a technical calibration of your internal yantra. You are aligning your geometry with the rising tejas of the sun. But there is a specific warning in the texts. Do not look for results with the logical mind.
The logical mind is a product of the filter. It will look for feelings, visions, or proof. It will try to turn the experience into a story it can tell. But the activation happens below the level of the story. It happens in the resonance of the blood. It happens in the guha of the heart. You will know the activation is working not because you see angels, but because the gray reality begins to feel thin. You will start to notice the metallic sheen on ordinary objects. You will feel a sudden, inexplicable sense of presence in an empty room. You will hear the high-pitched hum of the universe beneath the roar of the city. These are the signs that the antenna is beginning to draw power. But drawing power is dangerous if the wiring is old. The manual insists on shaucha, purity, not in a moral sense, but in a functional sense. You must keep the physical body clean of the noise of heavy, fragmented energy. The food you eat, the words you speak, and the people you associate with are all part of the insulation of your wiring. If the insulation is cracked, the higher voltage will cause a short circuit. This is what we call anxiety or spiritual crisis. It is simply too much energy passing through an untuned system. The first stage of the activation manual is about becoming a capable vessel. It is about restoring the integrity of the stone before you call down the lightning. Are you willing to do the boring work of the technician before you become the seer? Are you willing to clear the field and churn the fire in the silence of the junctions? If the answer is yes, then you are ready for the second step. The step where we stop preparing the machine and we finally press the start button. The button is a sound, and the sound is already inside you. The second step of the manual is the ignition of the sound. In the filtered world, we are taught that a mantra is a prayer. We think that if we repeat a word enough times, a distant deity might hear us and grant us a favor. This is the safe version, designed to keep you in the position of a beggar. But the technical manual of the Vedas describes the mantra as a Shakti, a direct power. It is not a request, it is a command. When you have cleared the field and stabilized your internal antenna through the breath, you are ready to introduce the seed frequency, the bija. These are sounds that have no meaning in any human language. Sounds like lang, rang, ring, or kring. The filter hates these sounds because it cannot turn them into concepts. You cannot think about the meaning of ring. You can only resonate with it. The manual instructs you to place these sounds in specific coordinates of your internal yantra, the chakras. You are not saying the sound, you are planting it. You are vibrating the seed in the soil of your biology and waiting for the geometry to respond. But here is the forbidden detail of the activation. The sound must be coupled with Krodha Shakti, not anger, but a fierce, directional intensity of will. The ancient seers describe this as the Vajra will. To activate the antenna, you must strike the silence with a sound, as if you are striking a spark from flint. It requires a level of internal pressure that most modern humans have been taught to avoid. We have been taught to be relaxed and soft, but the divine frequency is high voltage. Soft wires melt under high voltage. You must become Vajra, unbreakable, before you press the button. As the sound begins to circulate through your blood, the tejas, the heat, will rise. This is the biological sign that the dust is being burned off the circuits. You may feel a vibration in the base of the spine, a ringing in the ears, or a sudden pressure in the center of the skull. The great filter will perceive this as a threat. It will send distraction signals to stop the process. You will suddenly remember an urgent email you forgot to send. You will feel an itch on your skin.
You will hear a noise in the street that seems unbearable. These are the asuras of the mind, the fragmentation forces trying to pull your attention away before the circuit closes. The manual is clear. Do not move. Do not react. Hold the resonance. If you can maintain the frequency through the storm of distractions, something extraordinary happens. The phase lock occurs. Your internal vibration matches the vibration of the original signal that is always broadcasting in the background of the universe. In this moment, the guha, the hidden cave of the heart, opens. This is the first ignition. It is not a psychological shift. It is a physical event. For a split second, the gray reality vanishes. You don't see the gods with your eyes. You feel them with your entire architecture. You realize that the space around you is not empty. It is crowded with the metallic sheen of the immortals. But the manual also warns, the ignition is only the beginning. The real challenge is dharana, sustenance. Most people, if they achieve a moment of contact, immediately drop the frequency out of shock or excitement. They want to run and tell someone. They want to write about it. But the moment you talk about it, you are back in the world of the filter. You have stepped out of the resonance and back into the story. The Vedic instruction is, keep the silence, guard the fire. To live as a tuned human being in a detuned world is the highest form of discipline. You must learn to carry the forbidden frequency while you are at work, while you are walking the street, and while you are speaking to those who are still blind. You become a silent transmitter. The manual describes the Siddhas, those who have perfected this state. They don't need to chant out loud anymore. Their very presence vibrates at the frequency of the immortals. When they walk into a room, the noise in other people begins to settle. The filter in those around them begins to flicker, just for a moment, because a stronger signal is present. This is how the return of the fire actually happens. It doesn't happen through a mass movement or a political change. It happens through the contagion of resonance. One tuned antenna can begin to tune the others. But you cannot tune others if your own wiring is still smoking from the first ignition. In the next part of the manual, we will explore the integration protocol. How to stabilize the high voltage so it doesn't burn out your human life. How to deal with the shadow of the filter that will try to reclaim you. And finally, we will look at the ultimate instruction. The moment when you stop being the one who tunes the antenna and you become the signal itself.
The fire is churning. The seeds are planted. Are you ready to hold the voltage? The final and most difficult stage of the manual is the integration protocol. In the ancient tradition, this is where most seekers fail. It is one thing to feel the divine frequency in the silence of the dawn. It is another thing entirely to maintain that resonance while standing in the middle of a crowded city or dealing with the mundane frustrations of a filtered life. The great filter is not just a wall, it is a predator. It senses when a cell has become decoupled from the mass frequency. It will try to pull you back through the three primary forces of distraction: fear, desire, and doubt. The manual warns that after the first ignition, the filter will amplify these forces. You will suddenly feel a deep existential fear, a sense that you are losing your humanity. You will feel a sudden, intense desire for the very distractions you just discarded. And you will feel a crushing doubt that any of this is real. Is it just my imagination? The mind will whisper. Am I just hallucinating a metallic sheen on the world? This is the filter trying to re-establish the jamming signal. The Vedic response to this is abhyasa, the relentless repetition of the alignment. You don't fight the doubt with logic, you fight it with frequency. The moment the doubt arises, you return to the breath. You return to the seed sound. You retune the antenna before the static can settle. But there is a specific physical technique for this: dharana of the heart. You are instructed to keep a small part of your attention permanently anchored in the guha, the hidden cave. Even while you are speaking to your boss, driving your car, or buying groceries, a background frequency must be playing in your heart. You become a dual processor. One part of you handles the gray reality of the filter, while the other part remains in the court of the gods. This is the true meaning of being in the world, but not of it. If you can maintain this dual state for long enough, the filter begins to change its relationship with you. It stops trying to jam you and starts to bend around you. The ancients describe this as Siddha Bhumi, the ground of the perfected ones. In this state, the material world seems to cooperate with your resonance. Coincidences happen more frequently. The noise of the city seems to fall into a rhythmic pattern. The people you encounter begin to reflect back the frequency you were broadcasting. You have moved from being a receiver to being a source. The manual concludes with the highest instruction of all, the Mahavakya, the great statement. It tells you that the signal you have been trying to catch is actually the very thing that is looking through your eyes. Tat tvam asi, that thou art. You are not the antenna trying to find the God. You are the God who has temporarily forgotten how to operate the antenna.
The great filter was never a prison built by someone else. It was a game of hide and seek that we played with our own consciousness. The forbidden frequency is not a foreign sound. It is your own voice, stripped of the static of 1,000 years of fear. As we close this manual, the instructions remain the same as they were 5,000 years ago. Clear the field, churn the fire, plant the seed, hold the voltage. The age of the great silence is ending. The metallic sheen is returning to the world. The immortals are standing in the room, waiting for you to recognize your own architecture. The manual is now in your hands. But the manual is just paper and ink until the machine is turned on. The junction is here.
The silence is waiting. Press the button, start the resonance, and never, ever look back at the static. Chapter 6. The Return of the Fire. The final stage of the Vedic mystery is not an individual event. It is a planetary one. The Great Filter has spent thousands of years convincing us that we are isolated islands of consciousness, locked inside skin-bound containers. It has taught us that our awakening is a private matter, a quiet hobby we practice in the corners of our lives. But the oldest prophecies of the Rig Veda and the Puranas describe a moment when the internal vimanas of thousands of individuals begin to resonate in phase with each other. They call this the return of the fire. Imagine a dark room filled with thousands of unlit candles. If you light one candle, you can see a few inches around you. It's a start, but the shadows still dominate the room. But if that one candle lights 10 others, and those 10 light 100, there is a specific moment, a tipping point, where the darkness simply ceases to exist. The shadows don't fight the light, they are integrated into it. This is the physics of the end of the Kali Yuga. The filter is not a solid wall, it is a coherent field of low-frequency noise. It is maintained by our collective distraction. But resonance is more powerful than noise. One tuned human being creates a ripple in the field. 100 tuned human beings create a wave. 1,000 tuned human beings create a tsunami of coherence that the filter cannot withstand. The ancient texts describe this as the Kalki frequency, not necessarily a person on a white horse, but a specific, devastatingly pure vibration that sweeps across the Earth's surface, resetting the base frequency of the planet. When this happens, the metallic sheen we have been chasing through the static will no longer be a fleeting glimpse. It will become the background of existence. But what does this look like in the streets? What does it look like in the structures of our civilization? The seers warn that the transition is a shattering. The institutions built on the gray reality, the systems of control, the hierarchies of fear, and the economies of distraction cannot function in a high-frequency environment. They are built on the jamming signal. When the signal clears, the software of the modern world will begin to glitch and fail. To the untuned, this will look like the end of the world. They will see chaos, collapse, and the death of everything they understand. They will cling to the static because it is all they have ever known. But to those who have cleared their field and ignited their internal fire, this is not the end. It is the exhalation. The architecture of the immortals, which has been hollow and dormant for 5,000 years, will begin to manifest physically. The tirthas, the crossing places, will start to glow with a visible tejas. The ancient temples will stop being museums and start being power stations once again. The gods will not descend from the clouds. They will simply become visible. Think of it like an infrared camera suddenly gaining the ability to see the full spectrum of light. The objects in the room haven't changed, but your perception has expanded so far that the invisible occupants of the space are now your neighbors. You realize you have been living in a crowded room, thinking you were alone. But the return of the fire is also a moment of profound responsibility. The ancient manual says that in this final stage, the Siddhas, the perfected ones, must act as stabilizers. When the high voltage of the divine frequency hits the planet, the human nervous system is at risk of overload. The fear and confusion of the untuned mass can create a psychic storm that threatens to tear the social fabric apart. Your job, as someone who has followed the frequency, is to hold the Vajra will, to be the grounding wire for the lightning. You must remain in the Guha, the heart cave, while the world outside is screaming. You must maintain the forbidden frequency as a stabilizing hum that prevents the shattering of the vessels. The seers left us a specific image for this moment. Shiva, dancing in the center of a ring of fire. The fire is the destruction of the old, filtered world. The dance is the perfect rhythmic resonance that keeps the universe from falling into true chaos. You are being invited to join that dance. The metallic sheen is getting brighter. The ringing in the ears is becoming a song. The static is losing its grip. We are not moving toward a new religion. Мы возвращаемся к изначальной физике. But before the fire can return to the world, it must be fully returned to you. You must become a sun in your own right, a self-existent source of resonance that no filter can dim. The final instruction is almost here. It is the instruction that bridges the gap between the human and the immortal. It is the moment the antenna becomes the broadcast. The great filter is a collective hallucination sustained by a lack of synchronization.
In the world of physics, there is a phenomenon known as spontaneous order.
If you place 100 mechanical metronomes on a shared moving surface and start them at different times, they will initially create a chaotic, jarring noise. But within minutes, the subtle vibrations moving through the floor will force them into a single, unified beat. They lock in. The Vedic seers understood that human consciousness operates on the same principle. The forces of fragmentation, the architects of the filter, have spent centuries keeping our metronomes out of sync. They have used the media, the education systems, and the frantic pace of modern life to ensure that every human antenna is vibrating at a slightly different, discordant frequency. This discord is the fuel of the filter. As long as we are out of phase, our collective power is cancelled out. We are a flat line of white noise. But the return of the fire begins when a critical threshold of individuals achieves phase lock with the original signal. The ancient texts call this the satsang, not a social gathering, but a communion of truth. It is a technical event where multiple tuned antennas occupy the same space and begin to reinforce each other's resonance. When two people resonate at the same divine frequency, their power doesn't double, it squares. When 1,000 people do it, the resulting wave is powerful enough to physically alter the properties of the local atmosphere. This is the forbidden geometry of the New Age. As this resonance spreads, the great filter begins to experience systemic interference. You will see this first in the breakdown of the narratives. The lies that used to work, the fear-mongering, the empty promises of consumerism, the illusions of division, will suddenly lose their stickiness. People will find it impossible to believe in the gray reality anymore, not because they have better information, but because their internal receiver is no longer vibrating at the frequency of the lie. The metallic sheen of the gods will start to leak into the most mundane places. You might be standing in a grocery store or sitting in traffic when the phase lock hits. For a moment, the person next to you will stop being a stranger and start being a fellow vimmana, a luminous structure of light and geometry. The concrete of the city will seem to pulse with a hidden life. The noise of the machines will resolve into a deep, oceanic Om. This is the filter failure. It is the moment the jamming signal is overwhelmed by the return of the original broadcast. But the manual warns of a final counter signal. As the filter collapses, the structures that depend on it will go into a state of high-frequency panic. They will try to create a total noise environment. They will launch massive waves of distraction, fear, and technological interference. This is the shadow's last stand. They want to shake the surface of the lake one last time to prevent the reflection of the sun. In this moment, your instruction is driti, absolute, unshakable fortitude. You must realize that the chaos you see on the news or in the streets is not a sign of the end. It is the sound of the gray reality being torn apart by the returning light. It is the sound of the stick figures being burned away to reveal the masterpiece beneath. The seers describe a specific biological symptom of this phase lock, the urdhvaretas, the upward flow of the internal fire.
The energy that was once used for survival and reproduction begins to climb the spine, feeding the guha in the ajna center. Your very blood starts to glow with a higher charge. You are becoming a living tirtha. A tirtha is a crossing place. Usually we think of them as locations on a map, Kashi, Rishikesh, or a sacred mountain. Но в финальной стадии пробуждения вы становитесь тиртхой. Your presence alone creates a hole in the filter. People who walk into your field will experience a sudden, inexplicable peace. Their antennas will momentarily tune into your signal. This is how the return of the fire bypasses all the walls and all the guards. It is an invisible contagion of coherence. The ancient prophecies say that when the Kalki frequency reaches its peak, the earth itself will respond. The planetary kundalini will shift. The vimanas of the immortals will no longer be UFOs glimpsed in the corner of the eye. They will be the primary features of the sky. The architecture of the palace will be fully illuminated. But there is one final choice you must make. The return of the fire is not a rescue mission where the gods come to save you from a bad world. It is a merger. It is the moment the tenant realizes they are the owner. Are you ready to stop being saved and start being responsible for the reality you inhabit? Are you ready to stop being a human story and start being a cosmic frequency? The final part of the final chapter is about the dissolution of the witness. The moment the you who is reading this and the God who is writing it become the same thing, the fire is no longer returning. The fire is here. The final instruction of the Vedic science of the return of the fire is the most difficult to accept, yet it is the only one that is truly real. There is no you left to watch the light. As the resonance reaches its peak, as the phase lock with the original signal becomes permanent,
The observer and the observed begin to merge. This is the samadhi of the fire. The great filter has spent thousands of years building a sense of self, a small frightened me that is separate from the world, separate from the gods, and separate from the stars. But in the presence of the high voltage resonance of the immortals, this me begins to evaporate like mist in the sun. You realize that you were never the antenna. You were always the signal. The ancient seers call this sayuja, the union where all boundaries fail. When you look at the metallic sheen of the gods now, you don't see an other. You see your own reflection in a mirror that has finally been wiped clean of the dust of the Kali Yuga. The architecture of the immortals is no longer something you visit in a temple or see in a vision. It is the very shape of your breath. It is the rhythm of your heartbeat. The gray reality is gone, not because it was destroyed, but because it was never truly there. It was just a lack of light. It was just a temporary state of interference that has now been cleared. But as you stand in this new, luminous world, you notice something strange. The gods are looking at you, not as a worshipper, but as a peer. They are moving through the tirthas of your own nervous system, using your eyes to see the material world and your hands to touch it. The return of the fire is not a departure from the earth. It is the moment the earth becomes a vimmana, a sacred, measured space where the divine can finally walk in the open. The forbidden frequency is now the only sound you hear. It is the hum of the universe at rest. But even as the book ends, the resonance does not. The manual was only a set of coordinates. The chapters were only a way to thin the veil of your attention. Now that the filter is broken, the words must stop, because words are the tools of the gray reality. Silence is the tool of the fire. The ancient prophecies say that those who hold this frequency to the end will become the seeds of the next age. They will be the architects of a civilization that does not need a filter. A civilization where the gods and humans occupy the same room, speak the same language, and share the same light. You are no longer a tenant in a hollow world. You are the landlord of a palace of light. The metallic sheen is everywhere now. The ringing has become a symphony. The static has been silenced forever. The great silence is over. The broadcast is complete. But for you, the real work is just beginning. Every person you meet, every place you walk, and every word you speak is now a part of the return of the fire. You are the silent transmitter. You are the walking tirtha. Hold the voltage. Guard the resonance. The gods are no longer waiting for you to find them. They are standing right here, looking through your eyes, waiting to see what you will do next. The fire has returned. Now, shine. The silent transmission. The book has ended, but the resonance has not. This is the moment where the words must die so that the experience can finally live. The great filter is a structure made of language, and as you close these pages, the language centers of your brain will attempt to summarize, categorize, and archive what you have just read. It will try to turn the forbidden frequency into a memory. Do not let it. The true ending of this journey is not a sentence. It is a state of being. It is the silent transmission that occurs when a human being realizes that they are no longer a separate entity, but a localized pulse of the universal field. In the ancient traditions, when a student reached the end of the technical manuals, they were told to go back into the world of noise and remain there as a Siddha, a perfected one.
But being a Siddha in the modern digital age is a task of terrifying complexity. You are now a high-voltage instrument walking through a world of fragile, low-resistance wiring. You will notice in the days and weeks to come that your relationship with time has fundamentally shifted. The filter used time as a weapon, keeping you in a state of permanent hurry and anxiety. But as a walking tirtha, you now carry the Yuga Sandhya, the junction of ages, within your own chest. You will find that you can stand in a crowded subway or a chaotic office, and the time around you will seem to slow down. You will be moving in high resolution, while the rest of the world is still flickering in the gray reality. This is the first sign of the return of the fire in your daily life. You must understand that the gods are not looking for you to do great deeds in their name. They don't need your temples, your rituals, or your songs. They need your conductivity. They need you to be a clear, unobstructed channel for the original signal. When you walk through a dark room, you don't need to talk to the darkness to make it go away. You simply need to be the light. The metallic sheen that you once glimpsed in moments of high resonance will now become your constant companion. It is the visual signature of the divine field interacting with the material world. You will see it on the leaves of trees, on the surface of water, and in the eyes of children who have not yet been fully filtered. But there is a shadow to this light. As a silent transmitter, you will experience a deep, profound isolation. You will see the invisible occupants of the room that others do not see. You will hear the anahata sound beneath the roar of the city. You will know the truth of a situation before anyone speaks a word. This is the burden of the seer. You are living in a masterpiece, while everyone around you is still arguing over a stick figure. The great filter will try to reclaim you through this isolation. It will try to make you feel broken or insane. It will try to convince you that you have lost your mind, rather than realizing you have finally found your soul. The instruction for this stage is upeksha, the sublime indifference. You do not need to convince anyone of what you see. You do not need to argue with the untuned. Their journey is their own. Your only job is to remain in phase lock. Think of the way a massive radio tower stands in the middle of a landscape. It doesn't scream at the surrounding houses to listen to the radio. It doesn't move. It doesn't beg for attention. It simply vibrates with the power of the signal it was built to carry. Those who have their own receivers tuned to the right frequency will hear the music. Those who don't will only see a tower of metal. You are that tower. The forbidden frequency is now your heartbeat. The architecture of the immortals is your skeleton. The return of the fire is your breath. There is no final chapter, because the story of the universe has no end.
There is only the ongoing broadcast. You are now a part of the team of architects who are rebuilding the Palace of the Gods on the ruins of the grey reality. The 0 point is not a destination, it is the starting line. As you put this book down, take a deep breath. Feel the tejas in your blood. Listen to the high-pitched hum in the center of your skull. Look at the room around you and wait for the metallic sheen to reveal the presence of the Ancient Ones. They are here. They have always been here. And now, finally, so are you. The transmission is silent. The signal is clear. The age of the filter is over. The age of the fire has begun.